Another Thanksgiving, another forced family gathering. As I packed my suitcase in my New York apartment, I could already feel the exhaustion settling in. Every year, my family put on a show of unity, gathering at some extravagant location, fully funded by my grandfather. This time, it was the Azure Palms, a five-star resort in Miami, a place dripping in luxury, just like my family pretended to be. I sighed, catching my reflection in the mirror. 34 years old, a senior financial analyst with a six-figure salary, living alone in Manhattan. I had built my life on my own, without handouts, without the weight of anyone else's expectations. My grandfather, Arthur Wallace, had always told me, stand on your own 2 feet. That's the only way to know you're truly free. Too bad my sister never got that memo. Vanessa, my younger sister, lived in an illusion of wealth. A former influencer turned stay-at-home mom, she flaunted a lifestyle that only existed because grandfather funded it. Her husband, Jeremy, ran a failing restaurant, and their finances were held together with credit cards and wishful thinking. Social media was her playground, endless photos of designer bags, luxury hotels, and curated perfect family moments. In reality, it was all borrowed glamour. My parents, Douglas and Elaine, weren't much different. Their grand Florida estate, their expensive country club memberships, also bankrolled by grandfather. Meanwhile, I had worked for everything I had. And yet, somehow, I was still the outsider in my own family. By the time my plane landed in Miami, I had mentally braced myself for the usual routine. Passive-aggressive comments, forced smiles, and a whole lot of pretending. But as I stepped into the resort's grand marble lobby, something immediately felt wrong. "Miss Bennett, I'm so sorry, but we don't have a reservation under your name." The front desk clerk's voice was polite, but his frown deepened as he checked the system. "I do see the rest of your family's bookings, though." A cold realization settled in my stomach. Before I could even process it, the sharp click of heels signaled Vanessa's arrival. She strutted up to the desk, her signature smirk in place, a diamond bracelet glinting under the lobby's golden lights. "Oh, Claire," she drawled, faux concern dripping from her voice. "You're finally here, but no reservation? That's odd." I said nothing. She tilted her head, feigning innocence before delivering the blow. "Oh, right! I only booked rooms for our immediate family. You know me, Jeremy, Mia. And, of course, Mom and Dad." She flashed a smug smile. "The real family." Silence hung in the air. The front desk clerk looked uncomfortable. A few nearby guests glanced our way. My parents stood in the distance, deliberately looking anywhere but at me. I exhaled slowly, adjusting my grip on my suitcase. "I see," I said calmly. "Then I'll leave." Vanessa's smirk faltered. I pulled out my phone and opened my rideshare app, ignoring the way my sister's expression wavered. I knew her game. She wanted me to fight, to make a scene. Instead, I gave her nothing. "Wait," she started, but I was already heading toward the exit. The Miami sun was blinding as I stepped outside, a warm contrast to the cold knot in my chest. Within seconds, my phone buzzed Vanessa, then Mom, then Dad. I let them all go to voicemail. A sleek black sedan pulled up, and I slid into the back seat. "Airport, please." As we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of the resort in the rearview mirror. They had finally made it clear where I stood. Then, my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't them. It was grandfather. I answered immediately. "Claire?" His voice was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of anger. "I'm fine," I said. "I just thought you should know what happened." There was a long pause. Then, in a measured voice, he said, "Go home. I'll handle this." And just like that, I knew this Thanksgiving was about to change everything. The hum of the airplane engine was a steady backdrop to my thoughts. As the city lights of Miami faded beneath us, I leaned back against my seat, staring out the window at the dark sky. My phone sat in my lap, silenced but still lighting up every few minutes with another call or message. "Vanessa, Mom." The desperation was growing, and I wasn't surprised. They didn't expect me to leave. They expected me to sit there, swallow the insult, and force a smile like I always had. Not this time. By the time I landed in New York, it was well past midnight. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside the terminal, a stark contrast to the warmth I'd left behind. I hailed a cab, settling into the back seat as the city buzzed around me. Then my phone rang again. Grandfather. The first picked up instantly. You home? His voice was steady, but I could hear the restrained anger underneath. Just got in, I replied, rubbing my temple. Did they call you? Oh, they did, he said, a hint of amusement creeping into his tone. Multiple times. And they weren't calling to apologize. I scoffed. Of course not. Vanessa was the first, he continued. She spun some ridiculous tale about a misunderstanding with the reservation. Then your mother called, trying to downplay the whole thing, acting as if it was a simple mix-up. And your father? He didn't even bother calling until an hour ago. I think he realized by then that the situation had spiraled. And what did you tell them? I told them exactly what needed to be said. His voice turned firm, that their behavior was disgraceful, that their entitlement had gone too far, and that effective immediately, I'm cutting them off. I sat up straighter. Wait, completely? Every penny, he confirmed. I've spent years watching them squander what I've given them, treating it as an endless well. They never respected it, never appreciated it. But this, what they did to you, that was the final straw. For a moment, I just sat there, absorbing his words. Vanessa's perfect life, held together by carefully curated illusions, was about to collapse. My parents, who had lived in comfort for years without ever worrying about money, were about to experience a reality they never prepared for. What did they say? I finally asked. The usual. Grandfather sighed. Denial, excuses, then anger. Vanessa accused me of being unfair. Your mother said I was being dramatic. Your father, well, he mostly begged me to reconsider. I let out a slow breath, staring at the city lights outside the cab window. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I just felt exhausted. They're going to blame me, I murmured. They already are. He didn't sugarcoat it. But listen to me, Claire. You did nothing wrong. They needed this wake-up call. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I appreciate it, Grandpa. Really. You've always stood on your own 2 feet, he said. It's time they learn how to do the same. By the time I got home, my phone was filled with unread messages. I hesitated, then scrolled through them, half expecting more of the same desperate pleas. But no, this was different. Vanessa, Claire, you need to fix this. Now. Mom, how could you let this happen? We were counting on that money. Dad, just call him, please. You know he listens to you. I locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. I wasn't going to fix anything. The next morning, I woke up to even more missed calls and messages. But now, the panic was setting in. Vanessa's Instagram, once an endless stream of expensive brunches, designer shopping trips, and exotic vacations, had gone completely silent. No updates, no posts, not even a vague inspirational quote. That was a bad sign. By mid-afternoon, I got another call. This time, it was from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Claire? It was Jeremy, Vanessa's husband. I frowned. Jeremy? A long sigh came through the line. Listen, I know this is awkward, but I don't know who else to talk to. Vanessa is losing her mind. She's freaking out about the bills, the mortgage, Mia's school tuition. I closed my eyes. And what exactly do you expect me to do about it? I don't know. Maybe talk to your grandfather. His voice carried a desperate edge. Convince him to reconsider? I almost laughed. You're asking me to fix this? After what Vanessa did? I know, he said quickly. And I don't agree with how she handled things. But she's panicking. She maxed out all of our credit cards trying to keep up appearances, and now I cut him off. And now she has to deal with the consequences. Silence. You don't get it, he muttered. She's talking about selling the house, pulling Mia out of private school. I leaned against the counter, pinching the bridge of my nose. Maybe she should have thought about that before deciding I wasn't part of their family. Another pause. Then a resigned sigh. Yeah, I figured you'd say that. I didn't respond. Look, I'm sorry for what happened, he finally said. I really am. Vanessa, she's always been like this, you know? Chasing some fantasy version of life, pretending things are perfect when they're falling apart. I stayed silent, waiting. He hesitated. I just don't know what's going to happen next. I didn't have an answer for him. Good luck, Jeremy. And with that, I hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time, waiting for the guilt to come. It never did. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world outside move on just like I was about to. By the time a week had passed, the fallout had fully begun. Vanessa's social media had gone from silent to completely wiped. No more vacation pictures, no designer bags, no curated perfect family moments. It was as if she had erased her own existence. If she couldn't maintain the illusion, she wouldn't let anyone see the reality. The messages from my parents had slowed, but not stopped. They'd moved past the outrage stage and were now firmly in desperation mode. Mom, Claire, we can talk about this, can't we? We don't have to involve your grandfather. Dad, we made mistakes. We understand that now. But your mother is struggling with all this stress. If you cared, you'd at least try to help. I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, I was watching my family scramble without me being the one to fix everything. And honestly, it was freeing. Vanessa, however, wasn't about to go down quietly. I was on my lunch break at work when my phone rang again, another unknown number. I had learned my lesson after Jeremy's call, but curiosity got the best of me. I picked up. Hello? A deep breath on the other end, then Claire. Vanessa. I leaned back in my chair, bracing myself. Vanessa. Look, she started, her voice tight, controlled. I get it. You're enjoying this. I raised an eyebrow. Enjoying what exactly? She let out a bitter laugh, watching everything fall apart. You're just sitting back, watching from your little apartment, feeling so superior. I checked my watch, debating if I should even entertain this conversation. I'm at work, Vanessa. If you have something to say it. I need you to talk to grandfather, she blurted. He listens to you. He respects you. And what exactly do you expect me to say? That he overreacted, she snapped. That it was just a misunderstanding, that I didn't mean to exclude you. I let out a slow breath, pinching the bridge of my nose. You meant every word, Vanessa. You looked me in the eye and told me you only booked rooms for all family. Silence. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I continued, my voice calm. And now that you're facing the consequences, you want me to clean up the mess? I have a child, Claire, she hissed. Mia is going to have to change schools, and she doesn't understand why. Do you know how humiliating it is for her? I frowned. Mia is 7. She doesn't care about private school versus public school. You do. She sucked in a sharp breath. You think you're better than me. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, Vanessa. I just don't think about you as much as you think about me. I could practically feel the rage through the phone. I hope you're happy, she spat before hanging up. I stared at my phone for a moment before setting it down. Happy? Maybe not. But I was at peace. Later that evening, I found myself scrolling through my emails when one caught my attention. From Arthur Wallace, subject, thought you'd like an update. I clicked it open. Claire, your sister and parents have officially lost their minds. Vanessa came to my house today in tears, claiming she was being punished unfairly. Your mother followed shortly after, trying to guilt me about how difficult this transition is for her. Your father, true to form, waited until both women left before calling me to reason with me. He thinks I should reconsider for their sake, not because they deserve it, but because it's simply easier. I told them all the same thing. My decision stands. Hope you're well. Grandfather, I smiled to myself as I read the email twice. Vanessa had actually shown up at grandfather's house. She must have been truly desperate. But she had underestimated him, just like she had underestimated me. A few days later, I got an email from Jeremy. Subject, you were right. I hesitated before opening it. Claire, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say this. You were right about everything. Vanessa has been lying to me for years about our finances. I found out just how bad it is when I finally looked at our accounts. She never told me how much of her lifestyle depended on your grandfather. She made me believe we were fine, that the money was just extra for fun. But without it, we're drowning. She's angry. At you, at me, at the world. She still thinks this will blow over. She still thinks she can fix it by pretending hard enough. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Jeremy. I sat back in my chair, reading the email over again. The cracks were deepening. The reality Vanessa had fought so hard to avoid was finally catching up to her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. A week passed, then another. Vanessa had gone radio silent. No desperate messages, no angry calls, no passive-aggressive emails. Her Instagram, once a relentless stream of designer outfits and overpriced brunches, remained frozen in time. Her last post, a carefully staged Thanksgiving preview that never saw the light of day. It wasn't just Vanessa who had retreated. My parents, too, had gone quiet. The constant guilt-tripping and pleading had slowed to an occasional, vague text from my mother. "Mom, Claire, I hope you're doing okay. We're adjusting. That was a nice way of saying their world had turned upside down. I wasn't naive enough to think that meant they had suddenly seen the error of their ways. No, it meant they were running out of ways to fix this without having to take responsibility. And then, finally, the silence broke. I was in my office, going over a quarterly report, when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Claire, it was Jeremy." He sounded drained, like he hadn't slept in days. I leaned back in my chair. "Jeremy, she's leaving," he said without preamble. I blinked. "What?" "Vanessa," he said. "She's taking Mia and going to stay with your parents. She says she can't live like this." I exhaled slowly. "And what doesn't this mean?" "The real world, apparently." His laugh was hollow. "Selling the house, losing the country club membership, having to, God forbid, budget. She says I failed her, that she wouldn't be in this mess if I had just made more money." A bitter taste filled my mouth. Vanessa was nothing if not predictable. The moment things became too difficult, she ran. "She thinks if she moves in with my parents, grandfather will take pity on her," I said. "Exactly." Jeremy sighed. "She still believes this is temporary, that if she just holds out long enough, he'll change his mind." I rubbed my temples. "He won't." "I know that. You know that. But Vanessa, she's convinced she just has to play the waiting game." "And what about you?" I asked. Silence stretched between us. Then finally, he said, "I think this is it." I wasn't surprised. "She won't admit she was wrong," he continued. "She won't even try to make things work in a way that's normal. I can't do this anymore." I thought back to our last conversation, to the desperation in his voice. Back then, he had still been trying, still holding on to the hope that he could pull Vanessa back from the edge. But now, he sounded resigned. "I'm sorry," I said, and for once, I meant it. "Yeah," he muttered. "Me too." After we hung up, I sat there, staring out my office window at the endless rows of buildings stretching toward the sky. Vanessa thought she had won, that moving in with our parents was some kind of victory, that by digging in her heels, she could force the world to bend to her will. She had no idea she was walking into a sinking ship. By the time Vanessa settled into our parents' house, the panic was setting in. She had traded one crumbling illusion for another. My parents, despite their decades of pretending otherwise, were not financially stable. Without grandfather's money, they were scrambling. Their monthly expenses, property taxes, social club dues, their housekeeper, their gardener hadn't magically disappeared. At first, they tried to keep up appearances. They assured Vanessa everything would be fine, that they would figure something out. But Vanessa wasn't used to seeing them like this. She wasn't used to the arguments behind closed doors, the tension, the growing realization that their lifestyle wasn't sustainable. And then, one evening, I got the text I had been expecting. "Vanessa, you have to talk to him." I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. "Me? No, I don't." It took less than a minute for her to call me. I let it ring twice before answering. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped. "You're just sitting there watching us suffer?" I let out a slow breath. "I'm watching you deal with the consequences of your actions." "Oh, don't give me that consequences speech," she scoffed. "You could fix this in one conversation." "And why would I?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because we're family?" I clenched my jaw. "Now I'm family? Because a few weeks ago, I wasn't." She sucked in a sharp breath. "That was different." "Was it?" Silence. Then her voice softened. "Claire, please." "Mia, I cut her off. Don't use Mia against me. I'm not using her, she said quickly. She's confused. She doesn't understand why everything is changing. She keeps asking why we can't go to the club anymore, why we aren't going on vacation this Christmas. She keeps asking about you. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay firm. And instead of explaining the truth to her, you'd rather keep pretending? Vanessa's breathing was uneven. I can't tell her the truth. I knew what she meant. If she admitted the truth to Mia, to herself, that would mean accepting that the life she had built wasn't real. I sighed. I feel for Mia, I do. But this isn't my mess to clean up. So you're just going to turn your back on all of us? I hesitated. Then, finally, I said, No, Vanessa. You turned your back on me first. I hung up before she could respond. 2 days later, grandfather called. I assume you've heard about Vanessa's grand plan, he said dryly. I smirked. Oh, you mean the part where she thinks she can outweight you? Grandfather chuckled. It's almost entertaining, isn't it? I leaned against my kitchen counter. How long do you think they'll last? Oh, not long, he said casually. Your parents are panicking. I give it another month before things completely unravel. I shook my head. And what happens then? That depends on them, he said. I'm not their lifeline anymore. A pause. Then, softer, he said, But you, Claire, you've done exactly what I always hoped you would. You stood on your own 2 feet. And I couldn't be prouder. Something warm settled in my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one struggling to prove my worth. I already knew it. And that was something no one could take away from me. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Vanessa's silence didn't last. At first, she stayed at our parents' house, clinging to the belief that if she just waited long enough, grandfather would cave, that somehow she could outlast his patience and the money would start flowing again. But time was working against her. The first real cracks came when my parents realized just how expensive it was to have Vanessa and Mia living with them. With no financial support coming in, their already strained budgets stretched even thinner. Their arguments, once whispered behind closed doors, grew louder. Vanessa, used to getting her way, refused to acknowledge the reality of their situation. She still spent money they didn't have, convinced this was temporary. When my parents finally told her they couldn't keep covering for her, she snapped. And then, just like that, she was gone. Jeremy called me late one evening, his voice hollow. She's moving out, he said. I frowned. Moving where? I don't know. A rental somewhere. Your parents are pushing her out. They told her she had to start paying her share, and she flipped. Packed her things and left. I exhaled slowly. And Mia? She's with Vanessa. He hesitated. For now. I didn't ask what that meant. Jeremy, I said carefully. Are you okay? A bitter laugh. What do you think? Fair enough. He sighed. Look, I know I have no right to ask, but can you at least check on Mia? She adores you, and she's stuck in the middle of all this. I closed my eyes. I had spent so much of my life being the one to clean up after Vanessa, to fix the damage she left behind, and I swore I wouldn't do it anymore. But Mia wasn't Vanessa. I'll think about it, I said. Jeremy sounded relieved. Thank you. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Then, against my better judgment, I picked up my phone and sent a single text. Me? Where are you living now? No response. Figures. A few days later, I got my answer in the most unexpected way. I was coming home from work, juggling my bag in a takeout container, when I spotted a familiar figure standing outside my apartment building, Vanessa. She looked different. Not in a dramatic way, she still wore designer clothes, still had her hair styled, but there was something dimmer about her. She was trying to keep up appearances, but the weight of everything was finally showing. I walked up to her, keeping my expression neutral. What are you doing here? She lifted her chin. Can we talk? I considered saying no. It would be easy to walk past her, to remind her that she had made her bed, but something in her eyes stopped me. Fine, I said, but make it quick. We went upstairs, and I set my takeout on the counter. Vanessa hovered near the door, arms crossed. You found a place? I asked. Her jaw tightened. A 2-bedroom rental. Nothing special. I raised an eyebrow. And? She let out a sharp breath. And it's awful, Claire. I can't live like this. I leaned against the counter. Like what? Paying rent like a normal person? Budgeting? Not spending money you don't have? She glared. You love this, don't you? Watching me struggle. I shook my head. I don't love anything about this, Vanessa, but I'm not surprised. She rubbed her temples. I just need a little help. I stared at her. Are you seriously asking me for money? Her silence was my answer. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Unbelievable. Claire, no. I held up a hand. Let me guess, you don't have savings. You don't know how to budget. You don't want to admit that you can't afford the life you pretended to have. She swallowed hard. I just need a loan. I exhaled. Vanessa, if you had come here and said, I made mistakes, and I need to learn how to fix them, maybe I would have helped. But you're not here to change. You just want another bailout. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't budge. This is your reality now, I said. And you can either fight it or fix it, but I'm done saving you. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. I didn't stop her. A week later, Grandfather called. I heard Vanessa came to see you, he said. I smirked. She didn't waste any time, did she? Of course not, he chuckled. She's running out of options. I hesitated. Is there any part of you that wants to help her? A pause. Then I've helped her enough. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Me too. By the end of the month, things had shifted. Vanessa was still in her rental, struggling to adjust. Jeremy had officially filed for divorce. My parents, desperate to maintain their home, had sold off assets and downsized, moving into a much smaller house in a less prestigious neighborhood. And me? I had never felt more free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't tangled in their chaos. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the backup plan, the one they called only when they needed something. I was just me, and I liked it that way. Life moved on. Vanessa, my parents, and even Jeremy were still scrambling to pick up the pieces of their shattered illusion, but I had left the storm behind. Winter faded into spring, and with it, a sense of peace settled over my life. My days were predictable in the best way: early mornings at the gym, long hours at work, quiet evenings in my apartment. For the first time, I had no one pulling at me, demanding my energy, expecting me to fix their problems. And I refused to go back. I knew Vanessa was still struggling. The updates came in indirectly through mutual acquaintances, through snippets of conversation. I overheard at family gatherings I now had the choice to attend or skip. She had to get a job. A real one. Something she had avoided for years, convinced that her influencer days and grandfather's money would carry her forever. The reality was a slap in the face. Her credit cards had been maxed out. The luxury brands she used to flaunt were being sold piece by piece online. The carefully curated version of her life was falling apart, and there was no one left to hold it up for her. She tried to keep Mia in private school, but the tuition payments were impossible without help. Eventually, she had no choice but to enroll her in a local public school. And my parents? They were adjusting too. The sprawling Florida estate was gone, replaced with a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Their country club memberships were canceled, their extravagant social circles disappearing overnight. It wasn't just the money they had lost, it was their identity. They had spent decades pretending to be something they weren't, and now, stripped of that pretense, they were just ordinary people, and they hated it. I hadn't spoken to Vanessa since she showed up at my apartment. She never reached out again, and I had no desire to chase her down. But then, one afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello? Silence. Then, a hesitant voice. Aunt Claire? I sat up straight. Mia? Yeah. Mom's asleep, and I found your number on her phone. She paused. I miss you. A lump formed in my throat. I hadn't realized how much I missed her too. I miss you too, I said softly. She sighed. Everything's different now. I don't understand why. I hesitated. Do you like your new school? It's okay, she said. But I don't get why we don't do the same stuff anymore. Like go to the club or have big vacations. Mom always said we could. I closed my eyes. Vanessa had built Mia's entire world around things that were never real, and now her daughter was left to make sense of it all. Mia, I said gently, your mom wanted things to be a certain way, but that doesn't mean it was the right way. She was quiet for a long time. Then, in a small voice, she asked, "Are you still mad at Mom?" I sighed. I don't know. That was the truth. I had spent so much time angry, resentful, waiting for some kind of closure that might never come. But what I did know was that I wasn't going back. "Can I see you?" Mia asked. "Maybe just for lunch?" I hesitated, but only for a second. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." A week later, I met Mia at a cafe near her school. She was different. She wasn't wearing designer clothes anymore, wasn't glued to an iPad like she usually had been. She just looked like a regular kid, and when she saw me, she smiled like nothing had changed at all. We talked about her classes, her new friends, the art project she was working on. For the first time, she wasn't worried about social media, about appearances, about anything but being a kid. And I realized something. Maybe, just maybe, losing everything would be the best thing that ever happened to her. Maybe she had a chance to grow up different from her mother. And if she did, I wanted to be there for her. That night, I got a call from Grandfather. "I heard you saw Mia," he said. I smiled. "Yeah, it was nice. She's a good kid," he said. "She'll be okay." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I think so too." There was a long pause. Then finally he said, "And you, Claire, are you okay?" I thought about it, about the life I had built, the peace I had found, the freedom I had fought so hard to keep. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate. "I am," Grandfather chuckled. "Good." Another pause. Then, in a softer voice, he added, "I'm proud of you." Warmth spread through my chest. "Thanks, Grandpa." I hung up the phone, staring out my window at the city lights. I wasn't the forgotten one anymore. I wasn't the backup plan. I was just me. And that was enough. Story 2, I brought up my wife's children as my own, covered all of their expenses. However, I stopped giving and moved out when kids remarked, "I'm just some guy Mom married." I've always had some fundamental beliefs. You have earned everything you have by hard work, assuming accountability for your deeds, and showing loyalty to those you love. Also, I had to learn the hard way. Mind you, that liking the wrong people may really screw you up. I'm going to tell you the entire tale of how my beliefs were put to the test and how everything I believed to be true about family fell apart. To tell the truth, it's not a joyful story. It's about being exploited, and about seeing when enough is enough. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm going to tell it like it occurred, because I think it's vital to be truthful about these things. We often hear about happy endings, but sometimes the conclusion is just, well, an ending. And it's okay at times. It's even essential. I'm not attempting to be a saint here, I aired. I think I was too trusting to think the best of others. I paid the price for ignoring some warning signs. But I also learned a lot. How did it all start then? A woman by the name of Amelia was the first. She was a widow. She had lost her military officer spouse. She has 2 small children. One was a newborn girl named Mia, who was just beginning to walk, and the other was a lively 4-year-old boy named Daniel. I met them through a mutual acquaintance, and I could see immediately away that Amelia was struggling. She was obviously depressed, but it wasn't just that. There was more to it than that. She was worn out. I mean, clearly worn out. It was evident in the dark bags beneath her eyes and in the way she held herself. She gave off the impression that she was running on fumes. It was more than a simple case of fatigue. It was a profound, bone-weary type of fatigue that comes from bearing the weight of the world on your shoulders. I wasn't compelled or anything, so I didn't intervene. It wasn't a knight in shining armor situation. It was only I noticed her. One actually saw her. I watched her struggling, and I wanted to assist. I wanted to ease her and those children's burdens a little. I genuinely wanted to provide their lives some stability and support. I first offered to assist out with small tasks, like running errands and watching the kids so she could take a sleep. However, it soon became more. I wanted to be like a father figure to those children. Since their actual father was no longer there, I thought I could fill that need. Naturally, not to take his place, but to provide them with the affection and encouragement that all children are entitled to. I suppose you could say that I was drawing a comparison between their circumstances and my own ideals of diligence, accountability, and loyalty. Not because I had to, but because I truly wanted to. I wanted to give them what their father was unable to. It felt natural. It seemed to be the beginning of something positive, something tangible. For a long time, too. It was good. I threw myself into it wholeheartedly. I put in a lot of work to make sure the kids had everything they needed, including decent schools, great clothes, and a cozy house, in addition to paying the bills. The table was laden with food. Everything. I resolved to prioritize their needs over my own. Nor was I only attempting to provide for their necessities. I wanted to take away whatever feelings of grief they could have had due to the absence of their father. In order to make them feel safe and loved, I wanted to fill that gap. However, it was more than simply the tangible items. I also provided them with emotional support. I attended every play, soccer match, and school function. I gave the loudest cheer. I was their biggest fan. They replied when I arranged family trips, birthday celebrations, and all the dad-related tasks. They reciprocated my adoration. They referred to me as Dad. Dad, too, not just Thomas. And what do you know? I thought so. Yes, I did. I thought I was the luckiest guy alive. I believed I had built a true, devoted family. I didn't notice the fractures that were beginning to appear because I was so engrossed in the concept and my desire for it to be real. I disregarded the warning flags because I was so preoccupied with creating this ideal image. In retrospect, I realized that I was constructing on a shakier foundation than I had initially believed. But I was all in at the moment. I had my heart and soul in it. I was committed to being the greatest father figure I could be, and to making this work. I put all of my energy into it. And it appeared to be paying off for a time. We all had our customs, habits, and inside jokes. We were a family. I was certain that emotion was what sustained me. The early indications of problems were minor, hardly noticeable. The children made a few remarks. A little backtalk, an occasional roll of the eyes. Nothing significant. Nothing unexpected from children growing up. I dismissed it. It was just normal teenage things, I assured myself. They were going through a period. That was the only thing I wanted to perceive it as. Once, I recall, Daniel. He may have been 13 or 14 years old when he made a sarcastic remark about how I wasn't cool for not letting him stay out late. Mia, who was a few years younger, added something as offensive. I simply laughed it off, even if it hurt a bit. I reminded myself that they were only pushing the envelope, as all teens do. The disdain increased as the children grew older. Daniel. He was a full-fledged adolescent. By the time he turned 17, he began to disregard curfews, reject my advice, and overall act as though he had the right to do as he pleased. I guess it was typical adolescent rebellion, but in some ways, it felt more abrasive. I couldn't help but notice the meanness in it. Around the age of 14, Mia began to imitate her brother's actions. She would disregard my directions, roll her eyes at me, and brush off any worries I expressed. They put up a unified front against me, demonstrating their disrespect for both me and my authority. They seemed to be banding together against me, measuring my resistance to their pressure. Amelia's response, or rather, her lack thereof, was what made it worse. She refused to step in. She refused to support me. She would simply sit there and pretend not to see what was happening, typically while using her phone. She would occasionally even gently discredit me. Perhaps she would sigh as if I were the one being irrational, or she would appear as though she was preoccupied with her phone. It was more than passive. She seemed to be actively supporting their actions. She would justify them. They're simply exhausted, I see. Or they're in a stage when we have to maintain harmony. Something was always there. In reality, though, it was a history of condoning their contempt. She was undermining my authority by allowing them to get away with it, and making me feel more and more alone. I began to believe that I was the only one who was concerned with establishing limits and teaching them right from wrong. I was beginning to wonder what Amelia was up to. Was she intentionally undermining me, or was she truly this unaware? Around this time, I experienced my first true wake-up call, but I was still unable to really comprehend what was going on. One night was the actual tipping point, the time when everything began to unravel. Long after his curfew, Daniel returned home. He hasn't phoned, texted, or done anything else, and I'm talking hours late. Naturally, I was terrified, but it was nothing when he eventually walked in. Calmly, I may add, I asked him where he had been. Just a straightforward query, wishing for some responsibility. He didn't give me a glance. Relax, he said. I am not a child. That was it. No explanation, no apologies, just a contemptuous dismissal. You're not my real dad, he added. Quit behaving as like you own me. As simple as that. Thrown in my face after all those years of love, support, and caring, it felt like a stomach punch. Standing there, Mia added her voice. Yes, you're just a married man with a mother. It seemed as though the years we had spent together and the memories we had created were all for nothing. Something just snapped inside of me. It wasn't rage, not quite yet. It was more akin to a deep sense of disappointment. What's the worst? Amelia remained silent. She remained silent as she stood there. The greatest betrayal was her silence. It validated everything. I had been beginning to think that I was just a convenience to them. A supplier? Someone to do the tasks that their biological father was unable to do. That was the turning point. The realization that the family I believed I had created was a fabrication. Shortly after the initial episode, it occurred once again. It was Mia this time. I asked her to clean up the mess she had caused in the kitchen. Easy enough, correct? Fundamental accountability. However, she simply glanced at me and said, "Why don't you do it?" Instead of really doing it. Isn't that your home? It hurt. The rudeness wasn't the only thing. It was the manner in which she spoke, as if I were a servant of some sort, as if my sole function was to tidy up after them. It emphasized my outsider position and reduced me to a mere cleaner and provider. It was a conscious effort to minimize me and make me feel insignificant. Then, seemingly at the same moment, Daniel added the identical sentence once again. You aren't even a legitimate father. They seemed to be tag-teaming me, confirming their denial, ensuring that I was aware of my position, or rather, my absence in their lives. This time, though, Amelia's response was what truly made the difference. She didn't shout, didn't become irate. They have a point, Thomas, she continued, giving me a casual glance without even raising her head from her phone. You might want to back off. That was it. I realized it was finished at that point. The disdain wasn't limited to the kids anymore. Amelia had made a clear arrangement with them. She was working against me with them, the one who'd spent years of his life taking care of them. It wasn't a hurtful or angry moment. Not at all. It was a flash of insight. At last, I got it. I was finished. There was no turning back. There was no family here. It was a lie. And at last, I was prepared to leave. It was a silent insight, a serene acknowledgement of reality. I wasn't battling for something that didn't exist anymore. I was prepared to release. Thus, I took a step that I never would have taken otherwise. I paused. I ceased to give, ceased to care, gave up trying. The choice was not made hastily or rashly. It was an intentional, purposeful decision. I simply stepped back. I ceased to support them. No more transportation, no more stipends, no more defense, no more guidance. Don't worry anymore. I allowed them to suffer the repercussions of their own behavior. Compared to how I've been for years, it was a total 180. No matter what, I had always been there for them. I was gone now. It was painful. I'm not going to lie. It defied all of my instincts. It hurt so much to just leave this family, since I had put so much of myself into them, but I was aware that it was essential. I needed to defend myself. I was aware that it would be difficult. I anticipated their response, that they would attempt to resist. However, I was ready for that. My maximum had been reached. They threw it back in my face after I gave them everything I had. I had had enough of playing the doormat. They initially chuckled. Every time I passed by, they smiled at me, made snide remarks, and made fun of me. They believed they had triumphed. They believed they didn't require my help. They believed Amelia could supply all I had been supplying, so they were depending on her. They were mistaken. They would mock my attempts to establish limits by imitating my directions and making these little punches. Oh, Are we breaking the rules with this exaggerated emphasis? Is what they would remark. They smirked at one another and rolled their eyes. They seemed to be attempting to elicit a response from me by provocating me. Amelia. Oh, she was careful to cover for me. She provided the money for their little shopping excursions and ensured that their weekends continued to be occupied with needless spending and fast food excursions. She maintained their ease, their arrogance, and their belief that they were independent of me. I knew it wouldn't last, though. I was aware of Amelia's modest means. She didn't make as much money as I did. I said nothing since I knew she couldn't continue to spend so much money forever. I let them enjoy themselves. They thought they were getting away with it, and I let them. I anticipated the reality check. I didn't participate. I refrained from arguing. I didn't respond. I simply watched, waiting in silence for the inevitable. It was a peculiar patience, born by the conviction that I was correct. I was aware that the foundation upon which their conceit was based was precarious and would ultimately give way. All I could do was wait it out. The game was one of waiting. After then, things began to gradually alter. The frequency of the shopping excursions decreased. The trips for fast food became increasingly infrequent. New clothing ceased to appear. At first, the changes are subtle yet evident. Then more serious issues began to surface. School expenses started to become an issue. Amelia was unsure on how to respond when Daniel got into some difficulty at school. There was no money to fix Mia's broken phone. Daniel missed the ride the first morning, as I recall. He used to go to school with me. He had always taken it for granted and, for the most part, had never even bothered to express gratitude. Now he was alone. In the end, he had to rush to the bus. And he barely made it. Based on what I heard, I was out of breath and huffing and puffing. I realize it's a little thing. It was symbolic, though. It was the first significant rift in their cozy existence. And to be honest, I felt a feeling of accomplishment. Not happiness. Not quite, but a silent affirmation. I understood what it was like to strive and have to earn everything. I thought back to my early years when I had to work hard to support myself. But for them, everything had always been handed to them. I, of course, said nothing. I only observed. When Mia realized her shattered phone wouldn't be miraculously fixed, I could see the frustration on her face. I could hear Mom griping to Amelia, and I could hear Amelia's ever weaker justifications. She was beginning to understand that she couldn't give me everything I had, and she was beginning to run out of money. Mia had a total breakdown that day, complaining nonstop about how unfair it was that she couldn't get her phone mended. Amelia eventually acknowledged that she didn't have the money at the time in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. Although it was a little admission, it was a big one. It was the first time she had publicly admitted that her resources were limited. Their denial was about to come to an end. They were beginning to realize the truth of their predicament. They were beginning to realize that I, the person they had so easily disregarded and denigrated, had been essential to their affluent way of life. Now that the free trip was ended, they were beginning to notice some hiccups. Although it was a painful awakening, it was essential. My absence was becoming noticeable. Amelia eventually approached me shortly after the phone incident. She was upset. She naturally accused me of being immature and of ignoring my obligations. I was stuck on the phrase responsibilities. It showed me how she really felt about me. Not as a father figure or a lover, but as a walking ATM with responsibilities as a provider. She continued, accusing me of being the cause of all the problems. She accused me of being selfish and of leaving them behind, that my behavior wasn't manly. She attempted to instill guilt in me, to give me the impression that I was the villain. All of it was projection, naturally. She was blaming me for her own shortcomings. I gave in to her tirade. I gave her space to express herself. When she eventually stopped to catch her breath, I asked her a straightforward question. I questioned her about why she had never stood up for me. Why, despite their rudeness, she had consistently taken the side of the kids. I questioned her about why she had permitted their treatment of me. That's when it occurred. The truth eventually surfaced at that point. Because I agree with them, she sneered. Sneered and said, "You were never truly their father, Thomas." In addition to being a slap in the face, it confirmed all of my suspicions. However, it didn't end there. She continued. In fact, She acknowledged that she had warned the kids not to submit to my authority. She responded, "I told them not to let you control them. Before you and I could do it again, I raised kids by myself." The real kicker was that passive inactivity was not the only thing. It was long-term, purposeful undermining. She had deliberately cultivated their disdain for me and tainted their thoughts. Mia and Daniel were observing the entire event from the hallway, crossed arms, little smug expressions on their faces. They appeared to be enjoying the performance. This is it, I thought at that very moment. This is their true identity. Not the kind, naive kids I had attempted to love and raise, but pampered, entitled brats made possible by their cunning mother. In spite of the hurt and the treachery, I was relieved. It was done. It was the end of the farce. I had my response. There was no room for doubt. There is no place for uncertainty. Without a doubt, I knew that walking away was the proper thing to do. It was a terrible fact. However, it was also freeing. At last, I was free. However, before things improved, they deteriorated. The children began acting out even more as a result of Amelia's rage and their own sense of entitlement. Little things were the first. My personal property would go. After then, a few of my most crucial work files vanished from my computer. Despite the lack of evidence, I began to suspect that they were playing me. Then everything got out of hand. I discovered a long, deep scrape going down the side of my automobile one morning. I realized I had to take action at that point. I covertly placed surveillance cameras throughout the house. I kept it a secret, not even Amelia. All I wanted to do was collect proof, and I understood. I managed to get a video of them a few days later, Mia and Daniel in my closet. They were using scissors to cut off my garments while laughing. The vandalism was intentional. I didn't go up against them. I didn't scream or shout. I remained silent. I kept a record of everything. I kept the video. I photographed the damage. I collected all of their menacing text messages, every indication of their growing animosity. While I was covertly getting ready to go, I was playing along and giving them the impression that they were winning. I was aware that I needed to safeguard myself legally as well as emotionally. I wanted to be ready because I knew things was going to turn ugly. I was collecting the ammo I would need to defend myself if it came to that, and I was constructing my case. Even though it was a depressing and pitiful circumstance, I was resolved to deal with it as dignifiedly and calmly as possible. I was determined not to become like them. I was going to be shrewd, calculated, and quiet. Seeing a lawyer was the next step. I showed him all the evidence I had gathered and explained the entire situation. He nodded sometimes as he listened carefully. He also told me that I had a good case when I was done. He even recommended a restraining order during our divorce discussion, given the children's growing animosity. In addition, I reported the property damage to the police. I knew I had to report my stepchildren to the police, even though it felt weird. To shield myself from any further charges or legal issues, I had to make an official record of their actions. It was an additional step in the process of cutting connections and removing myself from this poisonous circumstance. Then I packed a bag one afternoon while Amelia and the children were out. I took very little, only the necessities, the things I care about most. I abandoned everything else. The appliances, the furniture, everything material that I had amassed over the years. They had no significance. My freedom was what mattered, my mental tranquility. I placed an envelope containing the divorce papers and copies of all supporting documentation on the kitchen counter. Screenshots of the threatening texts, the police report, and pictures of the damage. The act of separation was formal. There was no turning back. I left that residence without turning around. I got into the car that had a long scratch running down the side and headed out. I had no strategy. Not at all. I simply knew that I had to leave the poisonous atmosphere in which I had been living. The last phase was financial. I cut off Amelia's access to my money and closed all of the joint accounts. I realized that was a harsh action, but it was required. I had to stop her from continuing to condone the entitled conduct of the kids. The gravy train had to stop, and I had to say so. It was the last breakup of relations, the ultimate withdrawal. It was done. Amelia lost it, as was to be anticipated. She contacted me a lot, left angry voicemails, and accused me of being a bad person. a coward, and someone who had abandoned them. She said she didn't need my money and that she could get by without me. It would be better for her if I didn't exist. It was all bluster. She was in denial, of course, refusing to acknowledge the situation as it is. I didn't pick up her phone. Her texts went unanswered by me. I just blocked her number. I declined to become involved in any further disputes. I had made my peace. I had made my decision and was finished. I have to put my own health first. On creating a fresh start for me, the kids then began contacting me. They were first sending the same nonchalant, haughty texts as previously. However, the tone gradually shifted. They began to sound apprehensive, even guilty. They expressed regret for their actions, admitted that the situation was challenging, that they were having difficulty without my help. At last, the younger one, Mia, sent me a message. Only 3 words were used. "You are missed." That was a big change. However, it was too late. The harm was already done. The confidence was betrayed. No matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't go back. I said nothing. I didn't answer. I understand their remorse. However, I remained steadfast in my choice. I was determined not to make the same mistakes again after learning a harsh lesson. They threw it back in my face after I gave them everything I had. I was finished. My response was to remain silent. It was my way of stating that you had to live with the repercussions of your decision. That's my narrative then. It's a real one, even though it's not very nice, and it taught me some important things. The largest. Never, ever allow anyone to take advantage of you. Don't ever ask for respect. Don't waste your time on individuals who don't appreciate you. And when someone is using you, when someone treats you disrespectfully, leave. Don't think twice. Don't turn around. It's a challenging lesson, and putting it into practice is even more difficult. However, it is necessary for your own health and dignity. You are worthy of receiving love, respect, and compassion. You have the right and the duty to leave if you're not receiving that. Some people don't appreciate you until you're gone. It's too late by then. Even if it is a depressing reality, it is a reality. Don't wait for them to see how valuable you are. Recognize your own value and behave appropriately. It has nothing to do with selfishness. The key is self-awareness. It's about safeguarding your spirit, intellect, and heart. Reddit, thank you for reading. I hope that my experience may be helpful to someone who may be experiencing a similar situation. Keep in mind that you deserve to be happy and that you are not alone. Nobody should be able to convince you differently. Make your own decision. Story 3. Mom grinned as she sliced the Thanksgiving turkey. Your miscarriage has kept our family line pure. Relatives broke into laughing as my sister patted her son's head. Isn't one actual grandchild sufficient? None of them realized this would be their final family get-together, so I put down my fork and got to my feet quietly. I sipped my coffee and looked out my window at the garden covered in frost. The temperature had dropped, suddenly announcing the arrival of winter in Minnesota. Autumn leaves were still present in our garden, which is located in the affluent area of Eden Prairie. In the early light, the frost on the fallen leaves glistened. Another Thanksgiving season has arrived. My work as a senior accountant at a big accounting company was going well. My marriage to David was steady, and I had no problems about living in this place. The only relationship that remained delicately strained was with my mother. Amy, are you ready? From behind me, David called. When I pivoted, my spouse had already put on his suit and was carrying his bag for the trip. He had been slowly growing his career as an IT firm executive. He was the perfect husband, gentle, considerate of my job, and always encouraging. Indeed, I'm fine. Don't worry, I smiled in response. David would miss this year's Thanksgiving owing to an important business meeting. The outcome of his company's new initiative might be determined by this important business trip. Have you told your mom? Indeed. But she wasn't happy about it, she said. It's unbelievable that you're working before Thanksgiving. I mimicked my mother Martha's words as an influential member of the First Presbyterian Church. She was a powerful woman. As a prominent member of the community, she oversaw the church's social events and charity endeavors. Thanksgiving was more than simply a time for family get-togethers for Mom. It was the ideal chance to introduce the neighborhood to her ideal family. Mother often used the phrase pure bloodline. She most likely did so to show her pride in belonging to a prominent family that has roots in this country for many centuries. But after what transpired 2 years ago, that word occasionally took on a harsh connotation. I had finally gotten pregnant at that point, but I miscarried. My mother's attitude gradually altered after that. Even yet, she continued to appear loving. There were times when I glimpsed flashes of what appeared like relief in her countenance. In the meantime, she became more and more devoted to my sister Linda's son, Tommy. Linda was a dedicated homemaker, heavily interested in religious activities. Even when parenting her 5-year-old son, Tommy, she tended to rely a lot on her mother, giving her thoughts priority. John, her spouse, had a real estate business. Though honest in nature, he had recently showed signals of anxiety over changes in his wife's conduct. David touched me on the shoulder. "Are you all right?" "Indeed." I grinned as I looked at my hubby. "Do not be concerned. I'll take care of it my way." David gave a quiet nod. He was aware of my emotions. That's presumably why he felt awful about this work trip. I should leave. I got up and escorted my spouse to the exit. A cold wind blew in. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. Mother's house would host a large family gathering for supper. My sister Linda, her husband John, and their son Tommy would accompany her. Linda has been acting peculiar recently. Adam Foster, the associate pastor who had just moved in 6 months prior, appeared too close to her. Despite being well-liked by the female members of the church, the dynamic young assistant pastor's relationship with Linda was obviously out of the ordinary. I let out a long sigh. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving, the ideal dinner party hosted by Mother, an exquisite table arrangement in a vast white mansion for a family get-together. However, behind it all, something was undoubtedly beginning to go wrong with my cool-headed and collected demeanor. It was as obvious to me as day. I had a strong sense that the moment for the revelation of this important truth was drawing near, and my accountant's intuition told me that it was being concealed. Our family's existence might be fundamentally altered by what was about to occur. However, it could have been fated. That's what I felt. It started off chilly in the van on the way to Mom's place on Thanksgiving morning. I turned up the heat and tried to calm my racing heart. There were sporadic snowflakes dancing in the dreary, dark sky beyond the windshield. Mother's home was located in one of the most affluent areas of Eden Prairie. One of the town's features is the enormous White House, which has been passed down through the centuries. There were already a number of vehicles parked in the entrance's circular driveway. Relatives were starting to assemble as I opened the front door. Mother's voice rang out. Martha had already made perfect preparations. A navy blue dress with a pearl necklace. Her graying hair was properly combed and her makeup was expertly done. Is David truly unable to attend? She seemed to have been waiting to pose the inquiry. There was a tiny tone of displeasure in Mother's voice. No, he has a crucial business meeting, I explained. Well, I guess it's unavoidable. You young people always put work before family. I went to the kitchen, ignoring the irony in their remarks. Not at all. The meal preparations were already being assisted by Carol and my cousin Jennifer. In the oven, the bird had already begun to brown wonderfully. I'm happy we could be of assistance, Amy. Carol cried out to me with a look in her eyes that may have been pity or sympathy. Family members' perceptions of me have gradually changed in this way since my miscarriage 2 years ago. Soon then, the doorbell rang. Linda's family's arrival. Come to Grandma, Tommy. Martha raced forward, nearly ready to embrace her grandchild the instant she spotted him. Tommy was 5 years old when he joyfully giggled while being held by his grandma. Linda was behind them, looking pleased. Her husband, John, looked somewhat uneasy and glanced briefly at me while waiting for dinner preparations to be completed. The typical small conversation, church activities, neighborhood rumors, and school anecdotes for the kids all took place in the living room. But to me, the talk sounded weirdly empty. In particular, I noticed that Linda was avoiding any mention of the new assistant pastor. Dinner is ready then. Everyone started to move to the dining room as soon as Mother's voice could be heard clearly in the living room. Expensive Lenox china was used to arrange the table, and silver candlesticks held flickering candles. The golden brown turkey sat in the middle. Let's say a prayer. Everyone sat down, folded their hands, and bowed their heads. Martha began reciting the prayer. Her voice was full of its customary assurance and majesty, and we thank you for all the benefits showered upon us. Amen. After the prayer, the serving of meals began. Martha started carving the turkey with a big silver knife that had been handed down through the generations. Her movements revealed years of experience. Amy, you're always so focused on work. Aunt Carol addressed me. Isn't it time to discover a new life purpose? Yes, Jennifer added, cousin. God sometimes sends us challenges for a reason. It was obvious what those words meant. They were referring to my miscarriage 2 years ago. I lowered my gaze to the food on my plate in silence. Okay. But Martha suddenly spoke up while carefully carving the turkey. In an unsuitably upbeat tone, she said, Your miscarriage prevented the tainting of our lineage. Like an ice sword, those words slammed into the dining table, yet the relatives rushed to laugh to my ears. They sounded cruelly silly when they laughed. And then came the decisive blow from my sister. Linda smiled broadly as she stroked her son's head. After all, a genuine grandchild is all we need. There was a moment when time seemed to stop. I silently got out of my chair and set down my fork softly. Suddenly, everyone at the table looked at me. Amy. Mother's voice had a little tremble in it. I apologized for a moment. I declared this gently but strongly and exited the dining room behind me. There was a pause, then a series of bewildered noises. I stepped in front of the living room's huge window and gazed out. The light snow had evolved into real snowfall without my noticing. White snowflakes were softly dancing down into the darkness. The view had a curiously relaxing impact on my heart. After a while, I turned to hear noises coming from the kitchen. John was standing there. The expression on Linda's husband's face was clearly troubled. Amy, I need to talk to you. His voice was different from his typical confident tone as a real estate firm president. It possessed a mixed tone, blending worry and determination. Actually, something's wrong with Linda. I gave a silent nod. John peered around nervously, then continued in an even quieter voice. She's been meeting with the young assistant pastor often. And he paused for a bit and let out a heavy sigh. I want to get a DNA test for Tommy. Will you assist me? In that instant, all the parts connected in my head. Their fear gave way to confidence. The analytical abilities of my accountant had already started gathering several types of circumstantial evidence. I understand. Silently, I replied. The truth revealed on this Thanksgiving night would forever change how our family existed. However, it was an inevitable fate. I was sitting in my home office looking at my computer screen 3 days after Thanksgiving. David was still abroad on his business trip and in the silent house. The only sound that reverberated was typing. The DNA test kit was ordered by me. Last night, John had sent an email. I bought a commercial testing kit from Amazon, he claimed. Tests that were previously exclusively accessible at specialist institutions are now accessible to everyone thanks to modern technologies. However, I had other investigation methods. I was able to use my expertise as an accountant to follow people's behavioral trends by looking at their numerical footprints. As the person responsible for auditing First Presbyterian Church, I began by looking through the church's accounting records, to which I had access. Ever since Adam Foster's appointment, I have meticulously reviewed every document. This is, I noticed, strange expenditures in the church's charity activities monies. Every month, a fixed amount was being transferred to a specific account. The quantity wasn't much, but it was suspiciously regular. What are you looking into, Amy? I slammed the screen shut at the abrupt voice. When I pivoted, my mother was there at my study doorway. Mother, just work, getting ready for the audit of the church. Although my mother appeared to accept, there was still uncertainty in her eyes. You acted in a really rude manner throughout Thanksgiving dinner. Your comment was, Mother. Consider the reputation of the family. I was interrupted by Mother, especially now that Linda is about to take on an important position. A key role? Indeed. Linda has been suggested by Assistant Pastor Adam to lead the youth department. I couldn't help but scowl at those words. Youth department head. That was a position with tremendous power in the church. However, why? Linda? I continued my inquiry when Mother departed, this time looking through Linda's behavior logs, her phone logs, social media activities, and credit card usage history. All of it was captured as digital traces. Every Wednesday afternoon, patterns were apparent. Linda would go out citing church meetings. Nevertheless, the church's official schedule for those periods did not list any meetings. Then I discovered conclusive proof. Grayson is a small business hotel located in the Minneapolis suburbs. For the previous 6 months, Linda's credit card had been making consistent payments there. "I've found something, John." The first picked up the phone and called my sister's husband in private. "What are you saying?" "Linda has been attending a certain hotel every Wednesday, and a portion of the expenses are covered by the church's charity contributions." John sighed deeply on the other end of the call. "That's not all," I continued. "There's a good chance Linda knew Adam before Tommy was born." "What are you saying?" At that time, Adam was conducting a short internship at this church as a seminary student. The church records have it. There was silence. That quiet was akin to the quiet before a storm. "We may not have to wait for the results of the DNA test." John didn't respond to what I said. But over the phone, I could hear his labored breathing. The evidence collection proceeded for another week. Use my accounting knowledge. After that, I found more and more proof that Adam and Linda were together. Records of restaurant receipts, hotel reservations, and most importantly, anonymous transfers between them. The flow of monies disguised as church charitable operations. Even if it was deftly hidden, an expert could see it. Adam has been using church finances to sustain his connection with Linda. But there was an unanticipated consequence to this inquiry. I also found out about Mother's wrongdoing when looking through the church's accounting records. Martha Anderson has been misappropriating church cash for personal purposes for years. While the amounts were trivial, it was a serious reality. I sighed deeply after saying this. This evidence would be an effective tool for controlling Mother, but I was not sure if I should use it or not. The pivotal moment arrived in a surprising shape. One afternoon, Linda suddenly visited my house. "Amy, you're probing me, aren't you?" My sister's voice was a mixture of dread and rage. "What are you discussing?" Adam informed me that someone has been looking through the church's financial documents. I gazed at my sister in silence. Panic and dread flickered in Linda's eyes. "Please don't say anything." Her voice abruptly became imploring. "If this comes to light, Mother will. The church will be honest with me." Silently but firmly, I said, "Tell me everything." Then Linda started talking. Adam was a seminary student when I first met him 5 years ago. Their secret romance and Tommy's birth. His mom? No. Linda put both hands over her face. "Yes, but in order to protect the family's reputation, Mother hid everything." My cell phone rang at that very time. A call from the hospital was displayed on the screen. "Hi, Miss Anderson. Your mother has been rushed to emergency. We think it's a stroke." Following the phone call, I turned back to Linda. My sister was looking pale. When we got at the hospital, Mother had already been transferred to intensive care, awaiting. Among them were Adam Foster and other church authorities. The doctor said that the mother had abruptly passed out during church. The cause was shock at receiving an anonymous letter of accusation at the church. That letter described Adam and Linda's friendship as well as Mother's appropriation. "Who?" Linda's voice was shaking as she spoke. I gazed out the window into the overcast sky in silence. In the Fairview Southdale Hospital waiting room, snow had started to fall softly, as though it were attempting to cover all that was going to happen with a white blanket. Snow was still falling outside the window, in the pitch-black darkness from the intensive care unit. Her condition is stable, and she occasionally hears the regular sound of machines. While obtaining the doctor's explanation, I made an effort to remain calm. Thankfully, Mother's stroke was detected early, but it was impossible to completely rule out the potential of after effects. "Let's meet as a family," Linda said, her voice shaking. Linda, John, David, who had hurried back, and I, Adam, were already out of the waiting room. Church authorities urged. John's mouth widened wide before that. "The results of the DNA test are in." I held my breath. Linda's face lost its color. David stared at me, trying to figure out what was going on. John choked on his words, "Tommy. He's not my child." There was silence in the room. That quiet pushed down on our shoulders like thick weight. Linda, silently, the first turned to face my sister. "Tell us everything about Mother, about Adam." My sister covered her face with both hands and stayed still, but after a while she lowered them and gave us a red-eyed gaze. When Adam, a seminary student, visited the church 5 years ago, Linda's confession started. As though discharging a long-carried weight, her tale developed in bits and pieces. Adam was a seminary student when they first met. Secret rendezvous, the terror when pregnancy was revealed, and Mother's choice to expedite Linda's marriage to John. Mother knew everything. David couldn't help but interfere. Indeed, Linda gave a little nod. To preserve the family's reputation, Mother hid everything. She even used church funds to pay Adam hush money. Involuntarily, my voice became icy. Linda nodded in silence. The findings of my investigation were exactly in line with her confession. Mother's misuse of church funds. Adam, hush money. It was all a plan to preserve the family's reputation. What did you intend to do? Anger made John's voice waver. For what length of time were you intending to keep lying? Linda, stumbled. Mom, reputation. At that moment, there was a sound coming from the nurse's station. By the time we turned around, consciousness had returned, and Mother's bed was being moved back into her room. The paralysis on the right side persisted. The nurse said, "You may come now, but please don't excite her." We visited Mother's hospital room one by one. When I entered last, Mother weakly opened her eyes. Amy Mother's voice had lost its old power. In my luggage, I took up Mother's purse. Inside, found the church's bank book and a notepad tracking dealings with Adam Byrne. Everything. "I can't," I replied firmly but quietly. "Let us stop keeping all the secrets." That evening, the church's board of elders was immediately assembled. Adam Foster's inappropriate relationship and suspicions of church fund misappropriation were officially addressed as agenda items. The outcomes were as predicted. Adam was fired right away. Mother's place in the church was essentially taken away. In a sense, Linda was exiled from the congregation. The news spread very swiftly. This episode was widely reported in local newspapers as a church scandal. Scandal shocks respected church. The reality behind the senior family headlines after headlines cut into our life. We discussed Mother's care as a family a week later. The medical social worker recommended that the best option would be a nursing home. Linda protested vehemently. "You're planning to abandon Mother even now?" "Face reality," I responded quietly. "Mother requires skilled attention." And I paused for a moment. This decision is for all of us. In the end, it was agreed that Mother would go in. Amy, Mother stopped me on discharge day. Her right side paralysis hadn't fully recovered yet. "Perhaps you were correct." I was unable to respond to those words. I merely clutched her slender hand strongly. "But," Mother went on, "try to comprehend how I feel about preserving the family's good name." "I do understand," I responded calmly, "but reputation based on falsehoods will inevitably fall." Tears glistened in Mother's eyes. It might have been the most sincere expression of emotion she had ever displayed. For the first time in a long time, David and I ate dinner together that evening. "You did well." My spouse grasped my hand. "What now?" Outside the window, snow continued to fall silently. All signs of the past appeared to be obscured by the accumulation of snow. However, new shoots were undoubtedly starting to breathe beneath it. "I'm thinking about looking for a new residence." I grinned as we began our new life a little distance from this town. David gave a quiet nod. His eyes were filled with love and understanding. "Indeed, this isn't the end. A fresh beginning has begun. Truth sometimes asks a painful price. However, without incurring that cost, true happiness cannot be obtained." That's my opinion. A year has passed since then. In western Minnesota, David and I had moved into a new house in a residential development. The drive from Eden Prairie takes 2 hours. It seems like the ideal distance. In the kitchen of our new home, I was preparing to roast a turkey outside the window. Gentle snow was falling. There wasn't the harsh cold of last year. "Need help?" David called from behind. He put his arms over my shoulders tenderly. "Thank you, but I'm all right." I smiled as I turned around. The adoption agency's lay papers were on the table. We were making steady progress toward starting a new family. "It feels nostalgic," I said, gazing into the distance. Last year at this time, our lives had drastically changed since last Thanksgiving, as though everything had been washed away by a storm. Mother spends her peaceful days at a fancy nursing facility in suburban Minneapolis. Having lost her former dignity and social prominence, she seems to be confronting herself for the first time during my recent visit. Mother spoke to me with an unusually candid expression. Amy, I might have been wrong. The right side paralysis was gradually improving thanks to rehabilitation. However, the wounds in her heart hadn't healed yet. I was so concerned with looks, I lost sight of what was actually essential. There was a trace of regret in Mother's eyes that I had never seen before. From the nursing home window, the garden was well kept, as you could see. Mother's new life was apparently mirrored by the nurses pushing wheelchairs there. Linda had a more spectacular fall. The divorce was finalized, and John got custody. Only once a month, and even then, under supervision, is she allowed to see Tommy. She lost all social support when she was expelled from the church. Sister. Last week, Linda abruptly visited our new house. The sight of my skinny sister left me stunned. I need to borrow money. Her relationship with Adam had already ended too. After being expelled from the church, he had moved to another state. He wasn't paying any child support. I apologized, I replied strongly but softly. I won't clean up your messes anymore. Linda left in tears. Her receding physique didn't even preserve a ghost of my once gorgeous sister. John, however, had started down a different route. Having taken Tommy into custody, he was devoting all his attention into his son's schooling while facing the truth that he wasn't Tommy's biological father. He treated his son with the affection of a real father. John recently visited Tommy and remarked, "I can't thank you enough, Amy. Thank you for revealing the truth." Tommy is still too little to grasp the situation, but he's growing up healthily, surrounded by his father's affection. Seeing that is a great comfort to me. The church's unrest was slowly coming to an end. The embezzled money was being returned, and a new assistant pastor had been appointed. Bit by bit, combined with Mother's nursing home costs, our finances aren't exactly easy, but that's the result of our choices. The smell of the turkeys is getting better. David's voice snapped me out of it. Indeed, a savory aroma was beginning to waft from the oven. This year's Thanksgiving will be a quiet celebration with just my husband and me. Our recently acquired dishes and a white linen tablecloth complete the table. It's not extravagant, but it's a space that warms the heart. David looked at my profile and said, "Hey, are you content?" After giving it some thought, I nodded slowly. Yes, we're truly happy now, in the real sense. Eventually, happiness based on deceit and lies will fall apart. That was the lesson Mother learnt throughout a lifetime, and through that pain we found a new happiness outside the window. Snow continued to fall quietly. The white crystals gently wrapped the earth, seeming to announce the arrival of a new season. Surely fresh branches will grow come spring. That's how our lives, too, will move forward. Slowly but surely. Oh, by the way, David added, picking up the adoption paperwork, next Thanksgiving we could be celebrating as a family of 3. I squeezed my husband's hand. A new form of family. Perhaps that's a genuine bond, unrelated to bloodlines or appearances. Indeed, this is the path we've chosen. This is our new kind of existence. Found by choosing truth and eliminating deceit in the oven, the turkey was gently browning to a lovely golden hue. Its aroma suggested not bitter memories like last year, but a future full of hope.